Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Hello. Not legal advice. Please like, subscribe, comment, whatever. This one is I'm trying to do a little different. So there's a little different take on things. And I'm doing one on Tuesday that also will be kind of a little different. And we'll see where it goes. Good morning to all those I see there. Hello. The one, Barbara. Geo, I like Geo, that name. And of course, Mr. or Mrs. StreamYard, who also is joining us this morning. So thank you very much. I feel a little odd, and hello, Gary. I feel a little odd. It's a very serious topic. I'm going to do it again on Tuesday. Hello, Pete, with Spencer Cooven. Hope that's the correct pronunciation of his name. I'm going to do it again. I'm probably not going to do jokes for that one. So I feel a little odd doing jokes, but I'll do it for this one since that's the shtick. But I probably won't do it for the one on Tuesday since the topics are pretty serious. So anyway, for all you out there, hi, Darren and John. All of you out there, greetings and thanks for joining. Kind of today, what I wanted to do was, since I'm obsessed with Alpine, and now I am obsessed with the Epstein matter and just kind of trying to discover the facts. I thought I could try to combine the two since it seems to be the Epstein thing is relevant and Alpine's relevant, and there is something they share in common, so I wanted to address that. Of course, before I do that, and again, I put a caveat on these jokes. So yes, stealing someone else's coffee is called mugging. And liability is a criminal's best asset. And if you're in front of a judge who does criminal law and he loves the sound of his own voice, expect a very long sentence. As long as that joke was, if that is a joke, that's a question. Okay, so I've done so now we're moving on to those wonderful jokes. So I've done a bunch of hello Nathan and Darren. If I did see Darren's name before. So I've done a whole bunch of stuff on Alpine, various nonsense they've engaged in. My concerns about why FINRA and the SEC haven't acted. Most recently, for example, not GTI, Alpine, who's involved in a bunch of expulsion proceedings, is on an appeal, and they were seeking additional time. I think it's the second or third time they're seeking additional time to file a brief. And I just noted that FINRA didn't even oppose the application. And this is despite the fact that FINRA and the SEC have determined that Alpine Securities is a danger to the public at large, and yet they take no action to interfere with that process. And Alpine's obviously doing business. Apparently, when I was looking today, their revenue is about $7 million this year, and I bet you they spent substantially more or are going to spend substantially more on legal fees. So again, I don't know how they get funded, what they do. I've referenced they've had some gigs as kind of either consultants, bankers, or something like that. I don't know specifically. So they still have operations, but again, they operate and nobody stops them despite there being concern. So anyway, so that's the Alpine, and I'll get to the specific in the indication in a second. So then I go to the Epstein matter. So how am I going to link these two? Go to the Epstein matter, and I think about because in the news most recently is Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know who names their kid Ghislaine, but it's not a good place to start. Think she is, like, my opinion, and just like the ultimate scumbag of all time. So she's somebody who procured apparently, because she got convicted for it, procured young girls for Epstein to molest and rape and whatever else he did to them and whatever else went on. And she got sentenced to, I think, 20 years for that. And there was 4 witnesses, I believe. 4 witnesses testified. She got sentenced 20 years. I think she should have gotten a life sentence, to be honest. Although, if Epstein hadn't killed himself or died, depending on what you believe, then the sentence might have been less, because then they could have sentenced Epstein to a long sentence, and maybe she would have gotten a shorter sentence. But doesn't mean that she doesn't deserve whatever she gets, because she's someone who apparently, and we'll find out more detail on Tuesday, but apparently kind of was the one who went out soliciting the girls, contacting the girls, paying the girls, and setting up this scheme for Epstein. I don't know if she was a psychopath, a sociopath. I don't know how to characterize her psychologically, other than that she's like one of the biggest scumbags of all time and doesn't deserve any consideration. And kind of turned, not only turned her head, but participated in the entirety of what was going on, knowingly and intentionally. Now, she also had been charged with perjury for lying in a deposition. Apparently, in the discussions related to the ultimate sentence, that charge was dropped, but she still got 20 years. But she's not she wasn't a clean before that. And again, I think she's an ultimate, just absolute scumbag. So now we get to the current time where apparently somebody, and I think it was Trump's former attorney who's now in the government. So do I trust the government to solely act and what they procure? Do I trust any of these guys without, having somebody looking over their shoulder? No, I don't. And it would be like in a case. So if I'm involved in a case, and let's say the other side, who represents the other side, is not a scumbag, I still don't believe them. I don't just take what they say at face value. So anything that comes from anybody has to be scrutinized, period. It doesn't make a difference who it comes from. It has to be scrutinized. Can't accept anything at face value, because that's how you get burned. It's not a prudent way of dealing things. But apparently, we don't really know yet. Apparently, somebody from the administration met with Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm just going to call her GM from now on, or Scumbag, one or the other, in the last couple of days, and they went over 100 names or so. I don't know whose names. So previously, I kind of suspected that she was going to say something along the lines, that X, Y, and Z either were in or not, and in return that she might get some commutation or pardon. And the way it works is, when she comes in, it's called Queen for a Day, even if it's a man. I think is it King for a Day if it's a man? But what happens in a lot of these criminal proceedings is the government may want to do a deal with you. And that's what she's been doing the last couple of days. But before they do a deal, they want to know what kind of information you have. So when you go in there, you have complete immunity as to what you talk about, as long as you don't commit perjury. So as long as you say, I killed Joe Blow, and I committed tax fraud, and I robbed the bank, and I conspired here, as long as whatever you say is truthful, the prosecution cannot use that against you in a prosecution. And even if they could find the information from another source, if they try to prosecute somebody after they've given them this kind of immunity, it's tough, because the argument is going to be that this information still was kind of led them down the line. So, but she has complete immunity to tell them whatever she wants. Does that mean that she's going to do it? If she's a sociopath or a psychopath, how much, reliance can I have in somebody who's that? I don't really know if she's trustworthy at this point in time. But I was thinking that maybe, to protect somebody who might want protection, that she might come out and say, that person wasn't involved or whatever. And then at some future point, it can't be like she comes out and says, and I'm just making up a fact pattern, but let's say that she says, no, I never saw Trump at the Palm Beach place. And then like a day later, she got a pardon or a commutation. A pardon means like it would be like as if the thing didn't happen. She wasn't convicted. And a commutation means that it's kind of shortened. The life of the sentence is shortened. If there was like really close in time, then, people would be suspicious, let's say, of that. But perhaps, I was thinking originally, this is what I was thinking originally. And again, I think she's the ultimate scumbag, procuring young girls to be raped and molested for some scumbag knowingly and repeatedly. There's nothing. I mean, that is just repulsive, especially if you have kids, daughters, etc. So I was wondering in these meetings with, I believe it was a former Trump attorney, personal attorney, who's now working for the government, and who I'll not, obviously I don't believe any of this stuff, no matter who's presenting it, without close scrutiny. But I thought that she might get off, and that would be the trade-off, that she would give evidence that helped somebody out, and then she would get off. But it couldn't be right away. It would have to be near the end of the term, so we'd get a couple of elections in. We'd get a couple congressional elections in. It wouldn't hurt, let's say, the Republican Party in the second election. And that would be the trade-off, and she would remain silent thereafter. But, I thought of it a different way. They could also it could be the complete opposite, where she doesn't say anything. And the reason she doesn't say anything is say there's no deal, no immunity, etc., like that. And at the end of his term, he could still pardon or commute her and say, she was treated unfairly, and it was Joe's fault, and it wasn't us, and could commute her sentence. And under that circumstance, nothing would be said. Now, I think since the administration seems to be wanting this to go away, that might be an avenue they decide, where she doesn't say anything and she still gets a commuted sentence with the understanding you're not going to speak anymore. That's just kind of my thought process. But the whole point is about this, we'll get back to Alpine, is that she's a detestable human being who engaged apparently in sexual misconduct as to young girls, really, and ignored it. And the ethical, moral standards were that. And how does that connect me to Alpine? So Alpine, my disdain for Alpine, and I've talked about the 40 years. Oh, by the way, and Epstein worked for Bear Stearns at some point in time and was involved in the financial industry. What that is, I don't know. So there's a financial industry background too of all these shenanigans and whoever came over. Then we get to Alpine, and Alpine has a history, and I've detailed the history, Alpine Securities, of their various acts of misconduct as detailed by the government, FINRA, the SEC. And I've referenced it, but it becomes now more relevant in some fashion so Alpine's apparently engaged in all kinds of misconduct, and that's why they're trying to be expelled. One of the things they were involved with, they had this gentleman who was working for them, his name was Matthew, I believe. I'm looking at an October 3rd, 2022 document. I think his first name is Matthew. It's from FINRA, and it's with regard to an attempted association of this gentleman with Alpine Securities. And this gentleman had, I think he had a legal background. I don't recall he went to law school or passed the bar. I think he was working in compliance, and there was multiple departments. So it could have been started off with Alpine Securities, could have gone to an affiliated company, whatever. But he was in some kind of compliance dealing with the regulators, as I recall. And he got into, and it was in Florida, which is the irony, of course, because a lot of the misdealings that happen involving Ghislaine Maxwell happen in Florida also, and some in New York. A lot appears like in the Virgin Islands. What a name. But anyway, this gentleman worked in some kind of compliance for Alpine. And sometime after he started working, not like the next day, but after a period of time, a year and a half, I believe, he got into trouble in Florida because he sexually assaulted a girl under 16 years old, which was a second-degree felony, I believe, in Florida. It was at a movie theater, and she was sitting next to a father and her daughter. The daughter obviously was next to this criminal, apparently, since he apparently got convicted. So I'll call him a criminal, even though I haven't identified him specifically. But since he apparently got convicted, I think it's an appropriate title. But this guy groped the girl, and it happened several times, and the girl kept on moving over, and eventually became a scene. The father saw it, jumped up. The guy tried, and this is a movie theater was happening in. This gentleman, I use that term loosely, ran out of the theater. The father got him. The cops were called. He was arrested. He pled guilty to it. There's some nonsensical system that's set up whereby he's on probation, and if he's on probation and he doesn't violate his probation, then in effect it doesn't show up as a conviction, but he pled guilty to the conviction of, in essence, the second-degree felony for having groped this girl next to her father in a theater in public. So you can only imagine what other acts of depravity this gentleman engaged in, because I can't imagine this was the only act of depravity, just was the only act he got caught on. Anyway, so he pled guilty, but he continued to work at Alpine. And then I think in 2019, Alpine, because what happened is he had to, when he was applying to become a general representative of Alpine, he had to admit to this criminal conduct. Apparently, FINRA said you can't be associated because this makes you excludable. Then, despite all that, then Alpine, knowing this guy had been convicted of groping this girl and committing sexual misconduct, they moved to have him associated as their representative. That was in 2019, long after the incident, long after the disclosure. That went up through 2022 when they lost. And they basically said that he's excluded and there's not adequate supervision, etc. So this again involved sexual misconduct. So we have what reminded me about this is the depravity of what is alleged to have occurred at Alpine, just ripping people off, engaging in all kinds of misconduct, according to FINRA and the SEC, that resulted in the expulsion, the expedited expulsion, the repeated expulsion. In addition to on the side, they have no qualms having this sexual predator being their point person. That's what you're dealing with. And that's what reminded me of somebody like Ghislaine Maxwell, also in the financial industry, dealing with somebody in the securities business. So is that something that runs rampant in that business? Or is it just because they have a lot of super wealthy people, and when they're detected, it becomes big news? Or because they're super and wealthy, they're able to get away with this misconduct? But somehow, to FINRA, that I guess is a non-issue, and they're not moved, and the SEC is not moved, and doesn't cause them to act any more quickly in acting against Alpine. Just as with Ghislaine Maxwell, why wasn't she very scrupulously interviewed on multiple occasions? So now we need to be interviewing this is new stuff. And again, are they both sociopaths? I mean, is that the linkage that Alpine and it's whoever's operating it, are they sociopaths or psychopaths, and they don't care at all about ethics and morals, and don't even care or think that they have any exposure about getting caught? And is that because they know people at the SEC and elsewhere? Have they arranged deals? Do they have people in their pocket? And is that the problem throughout? Is that the linkage? Is that the government doesn't, not only does it not adequately regulate, but it doesn't adequately sanction misconduct. Anyway, I just threw that out because I know that Ghislaine Maxwell has been in the news, and recently I just saw that FINRA just kind of let the Alpine clan have some more time to file more briefs and to conduct business when, again, they've said they're a danger to the public, like somebody else. So I'm not equating the behavior. I'm just noting that the lack of morality and ethics and the impropriety of behavior involved kind of turning the cheek as to sexual misconduct, apparently as to both, and not being concerned about people having engaged in that and accepting it. And again, the linkage is Jeffrey Epstein came from Bear Stearns. I think that's where he started. And Alpine Securities is in the security business too. And I don't know, again, is that meaningful, not meaningful? I don't know. I'm continuing to watch Alpine and see where that goes. And again, I've made the suggestion that the government take it over, but I don't believe that the current SEC chairman, Mr. Atkins, has any interest in doing anything in particular to benefit retail shareholders. I think that, in fact, that he's been a disgusting disappointment. I don't know if that will change, but I don't think he has any interest in regulating for the benefit of retail shareholders. And we should make that well known and publicly known until that changes. And I've seen it to this point in time. All that has happened is that any ongoing prosecutions have been terminated, and they don't look like they're interested in regulating. We don't want over-regulation, but we do want regulation that protects shareholders, retail shareholders in particular, and we don't see it. And Mr. Atkins has not acted that way. And just kind of like FINRA, just kind of letting things go on like business as usual, is kind of like how these rich and famous guys get away. Nobody calls them out, and there's no sanctions for their misconduct. And they have the ability somehow to influence people in high places. The person I'd like to hear most from, and I'm going to ask Spencer Coven about it on Tuesday, is Alex Acosta, who agreed to a ridiculous sentence in, I think, 2008. And all that was done behind the back of victims. So victims are supposed to have the right to intercede and to state their opinion, sometimes offer testimony, but to, indicate, do they agree with what's going on or not? When Epstein went to jail the first time, they excluded the victims. Didn't exclude them, they just didn't contact them. So I think it's a big problem because it's not just the sexual misbehavior, it's those people having complete immunity and impunity for all their actions. And that's I think that's the bigger issue. The sexual misconduct just catches our attention, but I think it's just endemic or emblematic is the better word, emblematic of what the bigger problem is, that those people get away from everything and they're unregulated, and money, unfortunately, seems to buy them a lot of peace, and it shouldn't. And we shouldn't permit it, and we shouldn't let it be swept under the rug. And that's why I'm talking about it. That's why I'll have Mr. Coven on. And especially when somebody tells me not to look into something, that's going to encourage me not to. It would be like, for example, if David Reichman said, we're all good, don't look at these dubious shares, I kind of wouldn't take his word for it either. And that's kind of what the lesson, I think that's the lesson. I'm trying to, as we talk, I kind of like, these are kind of like free form. It's not like I thoroughly think these out beforehand. The lesson is, and I have, mentioned it in different terms, do your own due diligence. Don't accept anything at face value, except that the moon's going to go up tonight and the sun's going to come out. Those things you can accept at face value. But stuff that's a little more controversial, don't accept it at face value, and do your own work and be diligent, really. And don't be, just follow the cattle call. Really, do your own work, come to your own conclusions. Don't be a lamb. That's all I could say. Because we could see now that information, when it comes from public figures, often is inaccurate or untrue, and from politicians and government, I think it's just not trustworthy by in and of itself without being able to confirm it. Anyway, that's all I got to say today. You let me ramble on. I hope everybody stays well. Hope to see you Tuesday. I hope to have more information about GTII too. As it turns out, I may next day or two, and I'll let everybody know about that. Hope everybody stays well. Be well. Take care of yourselves. Think about it. Love any comments, questions, like everybody's input. Like to see what your take is on it, and what your take is of the financial industry and sexual misconduct and the ability of the rich and famous, because it could be famous people too, to get away with all kinds of misconduct that the ordinary folk would not be able to, or the reverse. You might believe that they get impacted more because they're rich and famous. But I'd love to hear your take on it. For everybody else, be well, take care. We'll talk soon. Have a great Sunday, and thanks for hanging out. Anyway, have a great day.